All right, so what we'll cover today, and then of course we want to hear from all of you as well. We'll introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about how we got started, how we make our podcasts, just kind of the nuts and bolts, and then of course whatever questions or comments you have.
Okay, so I can introduce myself first. My name is Malaika Hollist. I'm the brand manager for Arts Access Florida, and I'm also the host for Happy Medium. Arts Access Florida is our brand and our live site where we work with local artists and art nonprofit organizations. And through that, we have our podcast, Happy Medium, where we focus on local artists in our community.
And I'm Dalia Colón. I'm the executive producer and host of The Zest, which is all about food in Florida. Our tagline is citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm. The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. So anything related to food or drinks in Florida, that's what we cover.
Should I go?
Yes.
This is a more complicated answer.
Neither one of us thought we'd ever be sitting up here talking about this.
Neither one of us started in podcasting. So I found my way to this position. I did a lot of college because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I started with my major in family, youth, and community sciences, and then I also got my second bachelor's in film and media arts. And I kind of I wanted to work in a creative way and work with people. And before I got this position at the time, me and my best friend decided to make a podcast for fun. We'd originally had a YouTube channel where we would talk about films, and that became a little difficult for our schedule, so we switched to podcasting, and we would talk about films and then other things we were enjoying, and it was really just fun. You know, it was kind of like a chat cast, and around that time, I was looking for a new position, and this job came up, and they were looking for someone who had some experience in podcasts, and I was like, well, I have a podcast with my friend, and we've been doing it for like 2 years, and so that was kind of my introduction to podcasts. And when I started working here, I was originally just going to be part of like the production team and help produce it, maybe help like find guests, but the person who was the host ended up leaving, moving on to a new position about 2 weeks after I got my job. So then they were like, do you want to host it? And I was like, sure. And so that's how I ended up in the podcast world.
Similarly, I have a journalism background, and I had previously worked at WUSF and then moved on to something else. One day I'm washing dishes, and Robin Sussingham, does anyone remember hearing her on the air? Yeah, she lives in Lakeland. She called me out of the blue and said, hey, WUSF is applying for this grant to start a podcast. And this was in like 2017, 2018. We're going to put me down as the executive producer and host. Can I put you down as the producer? I just have to put a name. And I'm like, oh, what the heck? I gotta finish washing these dishes. They did not get the grant, but they still moved forward with the idea of a Florida food podcast. And so I was behind the scenes for the first year or two, and then Robin left for another opportunity. And so I became the executive producer and the host during COVID, which actually influenced our content quite a bit because we had been doing a lot of in-person interviews, and then we had to pivot. What can we talk about if we can't directly go to a restaurant and talk to the chef? So I think it actually was a good change.
Yeah. Okay, how we make our podcast. This is going to be divided into many, many things. But I think the first thing we want to touch on is like finding your voice when you make a podcast. I think it's really important to just be yourself. And as we've heard in other sessions, to focus on things that you actually enjoy or like to talk about, or it's not going to come across authentic to your audience. Like people can hear a lot in your voice, whether they're hearing it or seeing it in a video. So I think that's the most important aspect of like starting a podcast. Make sure it's something you care about. For Happy Medium, this podcast, the first season, was initially a part of a grant that we were doing for WSF and Arts Access Florida. And so we had a larger team, and they helped us create this whole process of how to come up with your podcast, how to come up with an idea. So I'm going to go through some of the slides that we have. It's a lot, so just don't try to read it all. Just try to tell you what's happening, and then, you know, a way you can do it for yourself. So initially we started off with deciding like who our audience was. We were trying to make an arts podcast. We wanted it to be for the youths, anybody between the ages of like 10 to 18 to start. We figured out who was going to help us staff it, like who was going to host it. At the time, I wasn't even sure that I was going to host it. We were still making those decisions. Who was going to help us produce it? Who was going to do the audio? We kind of first started out, okay, who's on the team? So that's kind of this slide. Then we kind of started to truncate it, and we're like, okay, 10 to 17 is too large of a range. Let's make it more niche. So we kind of went for, I believe, I'm trying to remember, this was like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years. I think at the time we went for the 16 to 17-year-old age. And we were looking for the host to be someone who was into the arts, which I happened to be. So it worked out for me because I grew up doing a lot of dancing and being involved in theater and also film. So I ended up being the host. But that was something we were looking for to start. And then we had our ask, what were we trying to do? We wanted a kids podcast, and that was our main goal. And then from that, we decided to create empathy questions. So that's something PRX talks about a lot, which I think is really helpful when creating your podcast. We went around to people and basically asked them, what are they looking for in a podcast? Where do they like to listen to their podcast? What kind of genres? Are they listening to something because they want it to be something they can share time with their kids in the car? Or are they just looking for something that they can enjoy on their ride to work? So we had a bunch of questions for that. These are just some of those sample questions. And then these were all the people we did empathy interviews for Happy Medium at the time. This person was like my friend and also was a dance teacher who worked with kids, so she was one. This was someone who worked at WSF whose daughter was 6, so we asked her what she'd be looking for her kid. I believe this was a mom and she had a 10-year-old. These were a mom and I think her 7-year-old. The 16, I can't remember Eden. And then there was Max. Max was like our standout from all our empathy interviews. He was 15, he was very into the arts, he was really, he wasn't like really any teenager I've met before. He was very confident, he had a really cool sense of self, he was very mature for his age, and he really was looking for something that felt authentic that he could listen to, that made him feel like when he gets older, he can find something to do in the artistic career, and he wanted to hear stories about people who were doing that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is YouTuber hair? One of the little sticky notes says he had YouTuber hair.
Oh, he had, he had that kind of like tousled TikTok boy hair that people like. He had that look. I'm not sure why we put that as a note, but.
No, I feel like that tells us everything, everything we need to know about Max.
That's what he looked like. He was really cool. Like, he was a really cool kid. These were all our people. So I think we had 6 people on this team. So we all kind of loved Max, and this was the person that we based the podcast on. And that's another important note. Sorry if cut in if you need to.
No, please.
That's another important note. We really wanted to focus it on one person. Like, even though this podcast is for more people, we tried to create the idea around Max and what we thought Max would like. And so I think that helps give you a focus and keep your podcast a little bit more niche, because it can turn into trying to serve everybody, and that's very hard to do.
You know what, I think that's so smart, because when we talk about finding your voice, it's very easy when there's a microphone in front of you to just go into like announcer voice or broadcast voice. A broadcast is broad. A broadcast is NBC Nightly News or NPR Morning Edition. But a podcast by design, we've talked about it, is niche. It's not designed for everyone, but by having an authentic voice, you will cultivate that loyalty. And then even topics that I don't think I'm interested in, if they sound authentic, I become interested. So just a note as you're hosting, whether you're writing a script or just kind of like freestyling, always talk to one person. Because we touched on this earlier, Mike talked about it, but like, does anyone here listen to podcasts? Probably most people. Yeah. What are you doing when you're listening to the podcasts? Anybody? Something else?
Yeah,
cleaning?
something
What
else.
else? What else? Exercising, okay. Driving.
Cooking.
Okay, cooking. So you're driving, you are maybe the only one in the car, or there's one other person. I have a shower speaker. Sometimes I'm listening in the shower. I'm always listening when I'm walking the dog with my earbuds, exercising, cleaning.
Yep.
And so you are always talking to one person. And that makes it feel like more, have you ever heard of the term like parasocial relationship? They feel like you're their friend. They feel like they know you, because from week to week, the guests will change if you're doing a show with guests, but you are the constant.
Yeah.
They want to hang out with you. I want to hang out with Malaika, and I don't really care who else is there. I just want to hang out with Malaika. And so when you think about finding your voice, just think about finding that one person. And if you can do an exercise like this, that's great. You might think of a particular person in your life, a real person, and talk to them, even if they're not there. Like my husband, I'll go home and tell him, hey, Braulio, I did this really cool interview today. The woman is a trapeze artist or whatever. That's what you should say on the podcast. It shouldn't be any different than what you would just go home and tell your partner or your friend or someone like that. So that's just probably my number one hosting tip, is just talk to one person. You might even print out their picture and tape it to your laptop and talk to that person when you're recording.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, make it someone like that you would want to sit and talk to and you'd want to listen to. And then for this, obviously this was a production. We did this over a couple months, but if you're going to do this for yourself, I would just pick, maybe 2 or 3 people. Maybe it's your sibling, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's your friend's son. If you want to do something for like a younger age, find the people who you hope to reach, and then ask them what do they want to hear and what are they looking for. What's this slide? Okay, so this was more into what Max was looking for. And these were kind of the 3 main statements that he made when we spoke to him. He said, I want to navigate my life with confidence. I want to be truly creative, free of expectations and rules and standards. And he wants an authentic, safe place to be artistic. Those were the main things he said. So there's Max, there's the hair.
There's the hair.
So we really tried to make our podcast that. You see it though, you saw it. And then this was the mood board we created as well. So this is really broad. You don't need to do all of this. But we tried to create a mood board that we thought reminded us of Max and some of the things he talked about. And these were some of the other podcasts that reminded us of him and we thought he would enjoy. And some of the artists he even said he enjoyed. Like some of these artists are who we literally asked him, what music do you listen to? What shows do you listen to? Yeah. Yes.
Would you mind describing what a mood board is? And
oh, yes.
How do you put that collage together?
Yes, okay, so a mood board, how do I describe this? So a mood board is kind of like what you want your podcast to like feel like, what it would look like. Even if it's audio, you can still create a mood board. So for this one, we kept in mind Max, but we also tried to keep in mind people like Max. And we asked him what kind of music does he like? What kind of, he mentioned like lo-fi. That was the kind of music he liked. So these images here, I don't know what this musician's name is, but the one in the middle, that was someone he told us about. So I pretty much went to that album cover and then found imagery that reminded me of that album cover. He mentioned, I think this is Z-Way. I've just forgotten her name, but she's a podcast host. She's very like, if you've seen her, she really, she's a comedian and she really like goes for her guests. Like she does not hold back. He mentioned her, so I brought her on here. And it's just kind of the feeling that you want for your podcast and some of the qualities you want for it. Like on here we have passionate, we have humble and open, we have, what else does it say, abstract. So that's kind of the idea of a mood board. It kind of just helps you imagine what you want your podcast to feel like for the listener. Okay, and then next we have setting the tone. Am I here? Yes. Okay, so for setting the tone, I think this comes before you even record, or even like for Happy Medium, by the way, is an audio and video podcast. So for me personally, I feel like setting the tone is more than just like what happens when you get there on the day and you're filming. It's kind of the energy I try to bring before I even get there. I personally would just, and we were just talking about this, I would describe myself as an introvert.
Ditto.
I'm not, I'm just not an extrovert. So giving interviews is something that I have to like kind of work myself up for. So to help myself do that, I always try to do pre-interviews. Like I've already emailed whoever it is I want to be a guest. We've probably had a discourse like through email. Then I try to do like a call. I always try to do a video call if I can, even if it's just 5 minutes on Zoom, and just be like, hey, get a face to a name, talk about what I want to do again, just so that I know what they look like. I can feel their energy. Okay, this person's maybe like a little shy. This person's like really outgoing. And then that helps me like cater my questions. And then when I get there on the day, like I'm not as anxious about it because I feel like I've already met this person. Did you have your hand up? Oh, sorry, just a little tuck. So that's like something I do to help set the tone before I get there.
Ooh, I am the exact opposite.
Really?
I'm also an introvert. I'm always nervous. I'm nervous meeting anyone, anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
But I guess I fake it well. I don't know.
Oh.
But I kind of like to go in not totally blind. I don't want to have a video call with the person.
Oh.
I don't want to talk to the person. I don't want to send them the questions.
I could never.
I'm gonna send them a couple bullet points. I'm gonna do my homework. I'm gonna like watch a YouTube video of another interview they did, or kind of like stalk them all to find out like, is this person high energy, low energy? I'll have like 3 pages of questions and I'll only ask like 5 of those questions and maybe a couple that weren't on the original list. But I just follow my curiosity. But we were talking about finding your voice.
Yeah.
And see, there's no right answer. We have no answers to give you.
What works for you.
Yeah, it's what works for you and what's authentic for you. But so I had a little bit of imposter syndrome because this is a food podcast. I'm not a trained chef. Now I have a lot more confidence because since starting that podcast, it's provided all these other opportunities. I've written a cookbook. I've been a judge for the James Beard Awards. I work with other organizations on food projects. So now I'm kind of like, Dalia, maybe you do know what you're talking about. But when we started this, I didn't know anything, and I didn't want to pretend like I did. So if somebody mentioned something, like I remember interviewing this chef, and he said, he was a firehouse chef actually, so he's like the chef at the firehouse. But he said something about, I wanted to get some experience. And so I did some staging. Do you know what staging is? And it would have been so easy to just say, yeah. But I was like, no, what the heck is that? Because I'm also the stand-in for you.
Right.
And probably not everybody in here knows what it is. It's like an unpaid internship that chefs do.
Yeah.
But if I have a question about something, I'm gonna ask it. And so it's kind of like, come with me, together we will discover XYZ. So I like to have a natural reaction. People surprise me. I will laugh. I will scream. I will, do all those things. And hopefully it works out. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can do whatever feels right. I too don't like to send the questions. That's the only thing that I do everything the opposite of what she just said. But I won't send the questions because it helps them. I think they have a more organic answer.
You want to sound like you're having fun. And I've even had people type out a script when I sent them the questions.
Yeah, and then it doesn't feel authentic.
It should sound like a conversation. It shouldn't sound like I'm reading from a list of prepared questions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and then with this first video you're gonna see, so this was a guest, her name is Lady Natasha Fine. She has an adaptive clothing line for anybody who has any disabilities. And for her, and there's a little cheat with this one, because I did know her prior to the interview, but it was like meeting a stranger. I hadn't seen her in like 10 years or spoken to her. But she kind of has an energetic personality. She's very fun. She's very like casual and just bright. So this is gonna be a video clip that's like in the first 2 minutes of the podcast. But I think it helped me, knowing her personality, it helped us set the tone. And Warren also, edited this video, and also I feel like really created that with the colors and the music choice that he has.
Lady Natasha Fines is the founder and CEO of Lady Fines Adaptive Fashion. She has always felt full of creativity and had a true passion for expressing yourself through clothing. She found her way to adaptive fashion from observing the lack of clothing for those with disabilities. From there, Lady Fines Adaptive Fashion was born. In this episode, we learn all things about her inclusive, bright and trailblazing fashion line.
So I think where my love for fashion began was Christmas. When I was like maybe 5 years old, my parents gifted me a trunk full of dresses, like princess dresses.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I love Disney princesses too. So I'm pretty sure that's where that began. And then rom-coms, I love rom-coms. So from then on, I'm now 32, I've always just been drawn to fashion. I get very excited. I think I cried when I went to the Met for the first time and I saw some dresses. Yeah.
Yeah, so all of that kind of came from talking to her before, telling her what I wanted to do, getting a feel for like her and how she likes to speak. And then when we had the interview, I think I just felt very comfortable by that time, and I think she did as well. And it just makes for a better interview. Any questions? Yeah. Okay, next we have Moving the Story. This is a video from a video we did with two St. Pete glass blowing artists. Sometimes when you're trying to tell a story and you want it to be natural, so you kind of let people talk. Sometimes they go into, the spiral and it starts to get really long. And in this clip particularly, I had asked them about overhead because one of them owns the studio and I was wondering how much does it cost, the materials, and he did explain it to me, but it was like a 4 to 5 minute explanation. So what we did here in the editing process for this was I kind of did a voiceover towards the end explaining what he said and like just kind of truncating it, but so that you still understand the message of what he's trying to tell you. So that's what this clip is.
To actually make your gallery quality work, you really need to go in with a clear idea and pretty much every step from start to finish how you're going to create this.
Glassblowing is an expensive venture. The overhead includes electricity, blowpipes, hand tools, cutting tools, and more. These tools are pricey, but a valued investment as they're made out of metal and can last you for years. But the most necessary tool to mold glass is heat.
Yeah, so when it comes to moving the story, sometimes it helps in that sense, but also it helps with writing your questions, and I'm sure Dalia has some examples as well. When I'm writing my questions, I try to write them in a way that it'll help move their story along. Obviously, I can't predict what anyone is going to say, but I think just writing it in a way that they can continue to build upon what they've already said, I think really helps.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes I'll say, oh, that was great. Say it again in 2 sentences. Or I've told people, this sounds harsh, but I'll say like, you can edit yourself or I can edit you. So if you want to have control over what you say, then say it shorter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you want to keep your audience. If you find yourself wandering while you're interviewing them, then your audience already left like 5 minutes ago.
And if it's boring, cut it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think Mike said earlier, leave them wanting more. They can go to the website and get the whole glass blowing tutorial. This is not a how-to. This is like infotainment. Okay, so I feel like people listen to podcasts, yes, for information, but also for companionship and entertainment. It's the same reason why people watch cable news at night. They're not actually watching it to get all the information. They're kind of watching it because the host that they like is keeping them company, and it's like infotainment. And so I kind of feel that way about podcasts. Yes, we're providing information, but we're also keeping them company. Like I have one podcast that I save for when I'm cleaning the bathrooms at home because I hate that job. I did it yesterday, and it's a comedy podcast. So like they're gonna keep me company while I do this dreaded chore, And so get rid of the boring parts.
Yeah.
You just put it in the show notes. Put a link in the show notes.
And then next we have listener experience.
Yeah, so I have a couple of clips that I'm gonna share. You are creating the podcast for your own curiosity and for that standalone, whether it's Max or someone else you're thinking of as sort of your avatar listener. And so you have to be their advocate. The listener is not there with you when you're recording. And so if you were here in the first session, we talked about getting rid of some of those annoying audio things Warren and Scott did, like if there's background noise, or if the host isn't wearing headphones, or if using a microphone or something like that, you have to set it up. You're the host. Think if you were hosting a party, like you would set everything up for your guests' comfort.
Yeah.
You would set the table, you would light a candle, you would make sure there's plenty of, snacks and toilet paper and whatever.
And you think through anything that could go wrong.
If you're having a house guest, you're gonna tell them the Wi-Fi password, and you're gonna think of all these things. Oh no, when they wake up in the middle of the night, I should put a nightlight in the guest room, things like that. So that's sort of the hat you can wear. You're hosting the show, just like you're hosting a guest in your home. And so you have to be a good host and take them on the journey with you. The difference between Happy Medium and the Zest is that the Zest is just a purely audio podcast. And so sometimes I have to tell the guest, paint a picture for me. This is something I say a lot. Or I have to paint a picture, you're nodding, or I have to paint that picture for them. So this is Huey Howard on the left and his son, or his nephew Gerald in the middle. They're in Felda, which is in the Fort Myers area. He's in his upper 80s and he's a cattle rancher. He started cattle ranching in Florida in the 50s. Nobody would sell land to a black man. So he had to give the money to his white friend, have the white friend buy the land for him, and now he sells beef to all these different companies. But I drove down to Felda. We sat in his truck because it was a hot day. But all you're gonna hear is like the rumbling of the truck. So how can I set that up for you so that you understand what's happening and you feel like instead of being annoyed by that sound, you're sitting in the truck with us. You know what I mean? Sometimes we do interviews in the studio, but not always. Sometimes we're in a restaurant kitchen or something like that. If you ever are listening to the news, NPR does this a lot. They'll be like, we caught up with President Biden as he was getting ready to board the helicopter. What they're really telling you is, in a second, you're gonna hear the sound of a helicopter, and now your brain knows what it is and it won't be distracted. So this is Huey. Gerald was sitting in the back. I don't think he talks in this clip.
Okay.
When Huey Howard got into cattle ranching in 1963, JFK was president, the Beach Boys' Surfin' USA topped the music charts, and a white landowner could refuse to sell property to a black man. But that didn't stop the Mississippi native from becoming one of Florida's few black cattle ranchers. Today, Huey and his family raise more than 400 head of cattle, and they've earned respect in Florida's predominantly white beef cattle industry, in which African Americans still account for only about 3% of our state's beef producers. The family was even honored a few years ago during a parade in Immokalee. Earlier this year, I met the 87-year-old at the Howard family's ranch in Felda, about 30 miles east of Fort Myers. It was a sweltering afternoon, so we settled into the air-conditioned cabin of Huey's gray Chevy pickup truck for a chat. His nephew Gerald was in the back seat. I spoke with Huey for the summer 2023 issue of Gravy Quarterly, which is a publication of the Southern Foodways Alliance, and this episode's audio comes from that conversation. In our chat, Huey shares why he's passionate about raising cows, his favorite ways to enjoy Florida beef, and how he managed to buy his first plot of land after all.
I'm Huey P. Howard. I run a ranch and I manage 2 farms. This particular farm that I'm really work at every day is just right down the road there, a little piece. And I work there all the time. And we farmed, we grow tomatoes, watermelon, cucumbers, we grow jalapeno peppers, sweet peppers, cantaloupes, and corn, beans, everything. We grow a little bit of everything that we do research on.
I didn't know that. I didn't know you had all those vegetables. And what about you, sir, in the back seat? We're sitting in this nice air-conditioned Silverado truck.
My name.
The idea, it goes on, but you hear the music, you know immediately we're in the middle of nowhere. There's cows everywhere. we're sitting in a pickup truck because that's the only vehicle we could possibly be sitting in.
It was fun. I closed my eyes for
you
a little
hear
bit
his
so I could
voice.
really hear it.
Yeah. Oh, and I love that too because, okay, I know video podcasts are like the future, but I love audio. And one of the reasons I was attracted to this job was because I did love listening to podcasts and audiobooks because it's theater of the mind. And so you can do a lot with video, but I think you can do even more magic with just the audio. So don't discount that because you can paint a picture for somebody with the music choice, with how you set it up. I mean, you hear him, he's an 87-year-old cattle rancher with that gravelly voice with the strong accent. I remember my stepdaughter, she's now 25 and my nephew's 27. But when they were little kids, maybe 8 and 10 or something, we were on a road trip from Tampa to Jacksonville and I was playing the audio, I think it was a CD at the time, of like The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary. Anybody know those books?
Yes.
Yeah. We got out at a rest stop to use the restroom, and when we got back in, one of them said, "Oh, can we keep watching that movie?" And I was like, oh, because it wasn't a movie. It was an audiobook, but it was a movie in their mind. And so you can create that for people, you know? And you can help your guests create that for people by asking good questions, like paint a picture for me. If they're talking and you can't picture what they're saying, then like just keep drilling down. You know what I mean? Ira Glass, I mean, he's the GOAT, and technically This American Life is a radio show, not a podcast, but you can listen to it as a podcast. But I remember some interview he did where he was talking about like secrets of interviewing, and he said, you know you're at ground zero when they're giving you the dialogue. So now hearing this, if I were to interview Huey today, I would drill down even deeper. And instead of just saying like, oh, your white friend bought the land for you, I would be like, well, what did you say? How did you ask him? What did he say initially? And then we'd get to the point where Huey says like, oh, and my friend was like, are you sure this is gonna work? And I was like, yeah, this definitely is gonna work. Because now you have a scene. You know what I mean? Because people don't really remember facts, they remember feelings. And so if you can create a feeling with the music, with the descriptions, then you really have something sticky. So next we want to talk about elevating community voices, because that's also what we try to do on the podcast. And this is a clip from a program called You Matter at USF St. Pete. And it's for college students with developmental disabilities. And so something we think about on the Zest, which other podcasts have said as well, is nothing about us without us. So if I'm talking about developmental disabilities, I can't just interview Wendy Wesley, the dietitian on the left. I need to include one of the students who's actually affected by this. Now, again, thinking about the listener experience, I'm not going to probably select one of the nonverbal students because that's not a good listener experience. But Wendy helped me choose someone who could do both, who was, you know, really outgoing, but was also affected by this issue. So that's Taylor, who's in the middle. And we don't have to play the whole thing, but you'll just hear a little bit of her voice.
Hi, I'm Taylor Moore. I'm in my second year of You Matter program. You Matter program is where people with disabilities can go and just live on campus and take 2 classes and just experience a college life. It's very fun.
Oh, I love that. Okay, tell me a little bit more about yourself. Like, how old are you? What do you do for fun?
I am 22, and I am going to be a teacher's aide, and I love playing video games, relaxing, hanging out with friends, watching movies, and just being an overall good person.
Oh, I love that. Well, I've known you for 5 minutes, and I can already tell it's true. And then Wendy, what about you?
I'm Wendy Wesley. I'm a registered and licensed dietitian nutritionist, and I teach cooking and basic nutrition to people all over the Tampa Bay area.
So tell me how you got involved with You Matter and just an overview of the cooking classes.
Taylor's professors found me, I think through a Google search. And they reached out to me and they said, would you be willing to do a cooking class for our students and just basic cooking? And I said, yeah. So we set it up. And we did it over the month of October of 2023 here in the kitchen at Allendale Church.
And we would have groups that connected with our schedules. Like I was grouped with Adabella, Navi, Jacob, and Jack. And yeah, we go every Monday night. It was from 5:30 to 6:30 or 6:45. we would go, we make, we'll eat, we'll go back. And it was like a 6-week little class. It was very fun.
So
okay, so you get the idea, and she gets into some of her favorite foods, and she gets very animated. But we're not going to do that episode about the You Matter program without Taylor or one of her colleagues, you know, one of her classmates. Recently, we wanted to do an episode about a local charity that offers food. I'm trying not to say the name because it didn't work out because they wouldn't give us somebody who actually benefits from the food. And I know not everybody wants to talk about that, but we're not just gonna sit here and talk to your CEO about hungry people. We're gonna talk to the hungry people. And so, so you have to be an advocate for the listener, for the community that you're purporting to be representing. And that can be anything from making sure you have somebody who is a good representative of the group you're talking about, but also getting back to the technical side, you have to be a little bit pushy, I would say, especially if you're doing a remote interview, because you want the listeners to have the best possible experience. So if you're talking to someone and their bracelet they got all their grandkids' birthstone charms on their bracelet and it's jingling, they need to take that off. And you have to be the one to tell them to take that off. Hey, can you turn off? I've turned off people's air conditioner before. I've unplugged people's refrigerator. I've told them to wear headphones. I interviewed Art Smith, the chef. He's a James Beard Award-winning chef from North Florida. He was, if you ever watched the Oprah show in the 80s and 90s, he was her personal chef. He's got restaurants at Disney and so forth. But I remember interviewing him during the pandemic. I was sitting in my closet and his audio wasn't good enough. And I was like, would you mind getting some headphones? I think I had told him earlier. And now what I do is when I email them the link to join the call, I put all of these notes at the top of the email, so they have to go all the way to the bottom to get the link. So they have to read through. Make sure you're in a quiet room, wear headphones, and on and on. But I can still remember the sound of him running up the steps, looking for headphones, and like he took some out of his kid's room, and he got the headphones. I don't feel like I should be bossing Art Smith around, but I had to do that because—
For the listener experience.
Yes, for the listener experience, because I want a good product for us, and I want him to be happy with it, so he'll share it. If you were here at Mike's session about marketing, he said that your guest is someone who can help you market their episode. But that's only gonna happen if they're happy with how it turned out. So you have to be a little pushy. One time I was interviewing Desiree Noisette, who's the founder of Mimosa Wines in St. Petersburg, and they sell the wine at a boutique. They sell it a lot of places, but they sell it at this boutique store, and she wanted me to meet her there. Well, guess what is right next door?
A little club?
Little spin class? Sounded like it, yes, a gym. And they were having a spin class, and you could like feel the music coming through the walls. So like 5 minutes into the interview, I said, I'm so sorry, but can we start over? Is there anywhere else we can go? So, and I felt a little bad for wasting her time, but that's better.
No.
It's better to waste 5 minutes of her time than waste 30 minutes or an hour of the listener's time, right? And so the boutique also sold clothing, and they had kind of like an inventory room that was basically a big closet. Closet's a great place to record because it's like naturally soundproof. So we started over and we did the whole interview in the closet. And I felt a little bad making her do that.
Better than nothing.
Yeah.
Like I had an interview. This is when I first started here, and I was really one woman show this day. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna video it. I'm gonna get the audio myself. I'm gonna interview this person. I was doing all the things. I was getting up every 10 minutes to check the cameras. And halfway through, I noticed her bracelets when she was like, and eventually I was just like, and I felt bad because we'd already done like 10, maybe 15 minutes, but I was like, I'm so sorry. Could you please take off your bracelets? I think she was like slightly irritated with me, but I
don't care.
When the interview came out, she said to me, she's like, oh, I'm so glad you told me to take off the bracelets because that would have been so distracting the rest of the time. And I was like, I know.
Yep. And because we're in a lot of restaurants and I have to ask them to turn off the music all the time because it's distracting and it's harder to edit when there are different songs playing and things like that. Yeah. I was gonna say something else, I don't remember. Do we have any questions? I was gonna say wear headphones. obviously you should be doing that anyway, but you'll catch a lot of these things earlier if you have on headphones. Yes.
I'm just curious how far ahead you are looking for and lining up your next guest.
That, I think for me, I start trying to get people nailed down like quite a while before, especially for my podcast, because we're trying to do video. It is like very hard to nail someone down and be like, hey, can you come to this place at this time on this day? So that's why I do feel like I have a good rapport with some of them, because I've been emailing them for like 2 months. And like, maybe we had a date and now they can't do that date, so I have to switch it. So I think the more time, the better. Dalia does a lot of batching of her episodes, so I'm not sure how long ahead she's ahead.
We've played around with it. In terms of the workload, like for instance, we're on season 10 right now of the Zest, and this season, I spent the whole summer recording interviews. And then, so like the one that's out today, I recorded several months ago. I'm now recording interviews that will drop in like February. So there are pros and cons to that. One of the pros is you can create like themes. So, you know, it is great to produce an episode every week, but if you don't have that capacity, maybe you do 5 and it's a limited series. You know what I mean? But you can't do that until you've produced them all and you can kind of see what goes with what. The downside of that is that things change. Restaurants close. We interviewed Dan Bavaro, owner of Bavaro's Pizza. I interviewed him in June, and then we had the hurricanes, and one of his locations was like badly ravaged by the hurricane. So I called him back. So the whole tone of the episode changed, because it went from like happy and we're having pizza at lunchtime to, oh my gosh, like how am I gonna keep all these people employed? You know what I mean? Something else that can happen, and this has happened with some of the other work I do outside of WUSF as well, is people get in trouble. I'm not gonna name names, but we've interviewed people who then got arrested for things, and we couldn't use it at all. You know what I mean? So, yikes. I know, but it is nice to batch it, and I would say, especially when you're starting out, I wouldn't release any episodes until I had like at least a half dozen in the can. Because you never know what's gonna happen. The person cancels on you, the power goes out, the internet goes out, there's a hurricane, and you have to evacuate. It's just very nice to have it scheduled in the can. Next week is Thanksgiving. I'm gonna, tonight when I leave here, I'm gonna record my my script for that.
Yeah, I think when you start out, it's best to not be held to their deadlines. Like if you can do it on your time and batch, I would do that. Like for example, the first clip I had, and it was awesome, but she was debuting at Fashion Week for the first time with her line. And so when we did the interview, it was like, okay, she's going to New York in like 3 weeks. So we obviously wanted to put out the video before she went. So then, you know, we were moving faster. But, you know, if it might help when you're first starting out and deciding what kind of podcast you want to do, something where you can really batch, I think is really helpful.
So that means more than likely it would be evergreen. You know, the New York Times has a show that's literally called The Daily, and it's the news of today, and then it's kind of like it's like an old newspaper that people wrap their garbage in. Nobody's going back to listen to an episode about Kamala Harris's campaign. That's done, you know what I mean? But we try to make ours more or less evergreen so that we can move them around. Yeah. Kind of like Tetris or something. But we do keep in mind, okay, New Year's is coming. What will people be interested in? They might want to be, you know, more healthy food, that type of thing. Yeah.
Can you explain what batching is a little more?
So before, we're not making an episode, releasing an episode, making an episode, releasing an episode. We're making maybe 5 or 6 episodes and then releasing the one and scheduling out the next one and the next one. Like, you know how some people do meal prep, where they'll make like a batch of rice for the week and they'll cook 7 chicken breasts for the week, and then they kind of like put them in little containers. And that's helpful too with the workflow, because once you're kind of like in the groove, you just go fast. You know what I mean? Like if you were wrapping Christmas presents and you said, I'm gonna wrap one on Monday, one on Tuesday, it's like, now I gotta take all the stuff back out. It's easier to just like turn on a movie and wrap them all at once or a couple days. Yeah. So I find that I work faster when I spend a couple months scheduling a bunch of interviews, doing the interviews, then I'm in that mode. Then I'll write copy for the web, because we talked about having a website. It's got to
show
live
notes
somewhere.
Yep.
And I'll write the show notes, and then I'll write my scripts, and I'll record those in batches. And I don't necessarily write a whole script, maybe just bullet points.
And I think that's more plausible too if you're looking to do like just an audio podcast, because you can kind of control your elements a little bit more. Or if you're not planning on having guests, like it's a lot easier to batch your episodes.
You said script notes? What are those?
Show notes.
So the show notes, if you look in your podcast player, and I can show you after, there's usually some notes about the show, maybe a summary of the show, maybe a link to the guest's website or something like that. Or like, we're gonna have, because we'll have a lot of recipes, and people we talked about how you're listening to a podcast. You're not writing it down when you're driving, but we'll say, hey, the dish that she talked about, you can get that, and here's a link in the show notes. You don't have to write it down. Do we have a question over here?
Could you share some wisdom about making a living interfering with the great podcast project? Do you have any examples you could share about how you juggled both worlds?
Okay. We talked about how it needs to be released on a schedule. The episodes need to be released on a schedule so people can fit it into their life. On Wednesdays, Happier with Gretchen Rubin comes out. It's about 30 minutes. I'm gonna run my little 5K around my neighborhood. I know that she's gonna be there for me and I can listen to that.
Yeah.
So in the same way that the episodes are released on a schedule, you sort of have to put yourself on a schedule. And say, I'm gonna work on it an hour a day, or Mondays are gonna be my podcasting day. Or for me, it works better to block out, everyone can't do this, but to block out a week and say, I'm only focusing on the podcast this week, and then maybe next week, I'll go lighter on the podcast. But it's tough because there are no rules. It's like the Wild West. So you have to create your own rules. You have to decide how long it's gonna be and keep that relatively consistent. You have to put yourself on some sort of production schedule, and hopefully you have other people helping you. But that's why I would say to have some episodes in the can or already produced before you release them, because then you can also make adjustments. Like, what type of podcast is this gonna be? You know how Malaika showed all those really cool slides of like sticky notes and graphs? We didn't do any of that with Zest. We did none of that. It was just, they had an idea, let's have a food podcast and people will love it. So we ended up making changes, not only the host, which is a big thing to change because some people are just listening because they want to hang out with the host. So that's already a gamble. A lot of podcasts don't last after the host is gone. But also, originally we were doing segments. I still have this spreadsheet.
Oh, like the multiple
segment. Yes, one episode might be Cuban sandwiches, mojitos, and a cupcake baker in Sarasota. Okay, the hardest part for me, I don't know about you,
finding
is
guests.
Booking the guests.
So hard.
You have to find somebody who's a good talker, so again, like watching them on YouTube or doing a pre-call or something. And then you have to nail them down. We've had people ghost us, people that I really wanted to have just like stopped communicating with us. So we decided to pivot. So instead of doing 3 or 4 segments per show, we're like, look, we're gonna do kind of what he talked about earlier. Instead of an hour show with 3 or 4 segments, we're gonna do a 30-minute show-ish, 20 to 30 minutes, with like one guest. And there are a few exceptions to that. We make the rules so we can break the rules, but we're gonna have one guest, because the hardest part is getting that person's butt in the chair. And once they're in the chair, like, let's go. Let's talk about whatever you want. We've had Rodney Kite Powell, who's a curator at the Tampa Bay History Center. He's so knowledgeable about any Florida history. So sometimes we would have him in the studio and we would talk for 30 minutes about Cuban sandwiches and then break, and then talk for 30 minutes about Cuban coffee, and those are 2 separate episodes. You know what I mean? And so finding little tricks like that will help you work more efficiently.
And catering it to your own schedule. You know, if you know that you only have X amount of time in the day, like focus on staying at that level. It's like, okay, I have 1 hour a week that I can put to this right now. Okay, then maybe I only have time to do like 1 episode a month. Like, you don't have to start big just because you want it to be successful or you want people to start engaging with it, you want it to just be consistent.
Yep.
Which is always the challenge. And I know I definitely struggle with that too, because it's like I have a lot of other responsibilities. So maintaining consistency is, I think, the constant challenge for podcasters.
But we got it down. I mean, in the beginning, it would take me like 2.5 hours to mix an episode.
Yeah.
Now I can do it in like 45 minutes.
Yeah, once you have templates for yourself.
We've scaled back the production. This isn't, what's the show on NPR that everyone loves with all the like cool sound effects?
Oh,
why can't I think
story.
of the name? I don't know.
I don't remember.
This is not a highly produced podcast. This is me finding a good guest. I'm putting my energy into finding a good guest and just letting that person talk. And then sprinkling in, we talked about finding your voice, sprinkling in things about myself because people don't want to feel like the host is a robot.
Yep.
So, you know, I might say something about my kids or about my husband or something like that. But you can find what works for you that you can maintain. It's kind of like the person who goes to the gym and works out for like 5 hours, but then they never come back versus like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk around my neighborhood for 30 minutes.
What
other questions?
Any questions?
Yes.
I have 2 questions. How do you bring out personality from your guest? And then how do you keep that guest or like the show in a time frame? Like, so they won't they have
That's
a
tough.
personality, but then it's like, okay, you have like 5 minutes.
I think there's a lot to, like, you know, we always, anytime we do an interview, whether it's audio or I've done a video and audio interview, really just like chatting to the guest when they first get on the call. Like, hey, how are you? Like very random, like regular kind of small talk chat. I think that helps loosen people up. And at least for me, I think also it's helped, hello. I think it's also helped, like that's why I like to do the pre-interview thing, because I feel like then they know me a little bit, so they feel a little bit more comfortable to be like, hey, how are you? You know, we found some commonality. And then I think that really helps keep the interview going. Now, when it comes to cutting them down when they actually talk, that's something you still, like, I still have to figure out, because it depends how long they're going. You know, if I'm usually listening and I'm kind of editing in my own head, I'm like, okay, this part was good. I can cut here. I'm gonna let them keep talking. If they keep talking for more than a minute, I'm gonna like say something silly and like get a new question in. So that's basically how I try to do it. I've rarely had to be like, sorry, I need to move on to the next question. Like, you know, usually the cues happen and it doesn't typically go too long, but yeah, sometimes you just gotta like find a sneaky way to like distract them so that you can move on to the next question.
Yeah, or act surprised. Oh my gosh, you're listing every dish you ever learned how to make at culinary school. Like, that's amazing. You know, you can kind of stand in for the listener because the listener's bored at that point. But it definitely helps to talk about yourself, because people want to naturally reciprocate. I remember that from a psychology class I took.
Yeah.
People reciprocate what you do. So if you talk about your personal life, they will start to open up and see that you're a human. And then with the length, I will ask them for a specific amount of time. Hey, do you have 30 to 45 minutes in the next 2 weeks? So they know it's not going to go longer than 45 minutes. And I'll tell them, look, once we're rolling, this is only going to take like 20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah, I always say that.
So they know what to
start.
expect. We've used different programs, especially, it's harder in person because they feel like, oh, she came all the way out here. I have to like wine and dine her and whatever. But especially with remote interviews, we've used different programs. We've used Zencaster. They all have their pluses and minuses. But when I'm using Zoom, like I have access to the WUSF professional Zoom, and I don't use it because the free Zoom has what, like a 40 minute limit?
That's good.
And they know.
I missed that.
They see that countdown.
Yeah.
We are not clicking on that link again. It's over. And so they know this is how much time we have. And a lot of the stuff that you would ask them, you can probably find out without asking them, without having them say it, and then you can just put that in the intro or something so that you're not like wasting their valuable time. I just interviewed, guilty pleasures, no judgment. Did anyone watch The Real Housewives? Any of those?
I've watched,
Okay, I've watched a couple of them. So one of them wrote a cookbook, Anna Quincoses, I think her name is. She's on Real Housewives of Miami. I had never watched it, but I was interviewing her about this cookbook that she wrote called Modern Cuban, and I'm like, okay, she's kind of a celebrity. She's not the kind of person I can like call back with follow-up questions. So I have to be very intentional about how I use her time and what I'm asking her, and I want to ask her the things that bring out her personality, and the rest I can find later.
Yep. And sometimes some people are just gonna talk too much or not give you enough, and you just kind of have to make it work.
Paint a picture for me is good. Asking them about their childhood is good.
Yeah.
And it seems like, you know, depending on the topic, that may not apply, but I promise you, you can make it apply.
Yeah. Just
Any
be
other,
yourself.
Any other
I think.
questions before we wrap up? And we'll be here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So audio versus video. What's the value of it as far as engagement?
I mean, for us, when we decided to do video, like when I started here, we had a podcast, we had something similar. Like I said, I wasn't originally supposed to be the host, so they already had like a setup, and it had the 3 segments of 3 different guests, and it was like 45 minutes, and it was audio only. And I was like, oh no, like I'm not gonna be able to find 3 people each episode. And I immediately was like, we need video. Because I personally, if I'm listening to a podcast, I'm usually listening to one that has video. Or even if I'm not, like sometimes I usually start audio, but then I'll be like, oh, do they have a video version? So that I can like, I don't know, just be there when I'm like, maybe cleaning my room, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I think the value in it is that connection to another person. I think that's why people like video, and I think that's why younger audiences like video. I mean, I'm not in my 20s anymore, but anybody I know in their 20s or younger, if I ask them where they get their information, even Max, it was like, well, I get it from this person. And when I asked why, it was because, oh, well, I like them. It was less about what they were talking about. They just liked said person. And so whatever they talked, like, that's like earlier we were talking about Joe Rogan. He's come up a lot today. People just like him.
They want to hang out with him.
They'll hang with him for 3 hours. I'm not going to hang with him for 3 hours.
For
but plenty of people will. And so, you know, he can do that because people enjoy him. I think he could say anything and his people will still pretty much listen because they like the person. So I think the value of video is that, like they attach to the host. I think you can do the same thing with audio. I think video, it's just a little bit more personal or something.
The last thing I would say, because I know we're over time and your Mac is about to shut down, your low battery alarm is going off, but is anyone in here because maybe someone at your workplace wants your workplace to have a podcast? Okay, you are. So I would just say, think about who should be the host. There are many jobs and there are many ways to contribute without we're both the host, but I wear a lot of other hats too. I'm like mixing the audio waveforms and all that. So if you have a law firm, the CEO isn't necessarily the person who should be the host. The person with a lot of charisma or a lot of curiosity would probably be a good fit. It doesn't even have to be the person who knows the most. I told you, I just am a home cook. I'm not like some food expert, but I'm very curious. And so maybe somebody with a lot of professional experience, they would assume that you know things, or it wouldn't work as well. So just consider who is the right person to be the host. And it doesn't have to be the person who knows the most.
I was just going to add to your point of like, go to the legal assistant. They're the one with the true tea.
Right? Yeah. They're the one with the personality, because the other thing is if it's just audio, you have to have like some personality to your voice. I always tell people, act like you're reading a book to a child. You know what I mean? Because your voice will just have a lot more
levels.
Yeah.
It'll be more colorful.
Yeah. All right, we're going to give you the last, okay. I could talk about this all night. I love talking about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.